In the United States, there's a whole range of manufacturers. Some of them see this as an opportunity to differentiate themselves, to stand out front of the market and show how they can be leaders. And so they embrace this sort of thing. They embrace and they say, well, you know, we can do this. We can show how our products work, or we can even change how we make our products to make them work better for LEED buildings. And so they see it as really an opportunity to gain new markets or to gain new market share. Other manufacturers, some of them feel a little threatened because sometimes they see the standards maybe their products don't look as good and they don't know how to make the changes. And so they get defensive and they say, oh, maybe the system isn't so good. You know, so it's a whole range of responses. But the important thing is there's enough manufacturers who are willing to stand up and say, you know, yes, we want to make products that meet this, that it's becoming easier and easier to find products to support green building, to do green building. It's much more difficult here because the LEED standard was created in the United States, and so there's not as many companies in Europe that are making products specifically to these standards. So it'll take a little time. It's an evolution, but it's coming. It's coming, it'll take time. You asked also about investors. And investors is very interesting because they have a real opportunity also in terms of something new that they can find to make their investment stand out, to differentiate what they do from the rest of the market. But they also sense a sense of risk because when it's something new and different and they don't know what the response will be or how people will buy it. So again, you see the differentiation between the investors who are more aggressive and who are willing to take risks in pursuit of a new opportunity, and the investors who are very conservative and more risk averse, as we say, then they are a little more protective and not sure and waiting to see how it plays out. At this point, in terms of buildings, at least in the cities in the US, every grade A office building now is going for LEED certification. It's become almost an expected, like almost a standard. But lower cost properties, lower quality properties, not as much. And in Europe, it's just starting. Serbia has a number of real opportunities and advantages here. One is the standards, for example, for energy measurement that are used in the LEED rating system are based on the ASHRAE standards, and those are used here in Serbia, even though they're not used in some other parts of Europe. So the engineers here are already familiar with some of those standards, so that's a step up. Also in Serbia, you have a long tradition of construction companies that do big fancy projects all over the world. So you understand quality of construction and you understand the project management to deliver these complicated projects. So you have the expertise and the infrastructure to do any kind of building. So it shouldn't be so hard to adopt these standards and in fact make it something that in Serbia can become an expertise, something that you can then use and have an advantage in doing construction projects in other countries as well. The other thing you have here in Serbia is very many wonderful older buildings. And older buildings, there's an opportunity, they need to be upgraded a little bit to become more energy efficient. But they start from a very good place because they have very good mass, very good thermal mass, very massive construction, and windows, smaller windows. So it's easier to make a building like that very energy efficient than it is a big glass tower. The fancy modern glass buildings with all of the glazed walls, it's very hard to make those energy efficient because glass is not such an efficient material. So all these wonderful old buildings you have with not so much investment can become very energy efficient. And then they can serve the next generation, right? As energy becomes more expensive, buildings start to become obsolete because it becomes too expensive. And so you need to reinvest in those buildings. But with some of these wonderful old buildings, it's not such a big investment to make them energy efficient. And then they can become very good for the next generation. So many opportunities here in Serbia to do that. So with older buildings, yes, it's back to the basics in terms of finding the right balance of window area to wall area, in terms of letting light, having good light into the space through windows, many windows. But it's also using new technology to make that basic configuration more efficient. So it's a meeting of the old design standards, the old basic design principles, with the latest new technologies and products that can help them function in a more efficient way. There's an important role for regulation. I think regulation should be should set a bar that is not so high that it's impossible to build anything or to refurbish anything, but should set a standard that is high in terms of basic performance. And then you still need voluntary programs for people that want to reach above that standard. Because as we say in the US, if you just build to code, right, if you just build to meet the code, you're building the worst building you're allowed to build. And that's not good enough for most people, right? You want to build better than that. But so you want the codes to be strong, and you also need not just the regulation, but you also need good enforcement, right? You need somebody who's checking and who's actually having penalties if the buildings don't meet the codes. So you need a good enforcement program as well to make sure that buildings are meeting the codes. And then the voluntary system can be a way for the leaders to stand out. And then over time, as more and more companies start to meet the voluntary standards and the technologies become more common and the resources, the know-how, the expertise becomes more available, then it's easy, the codes can go higher a little bit because everybody already knows how to do this. And so you can gradually step up and step up and step up until we get to the point where buildings really are good for the environment, where they're helping prevent climate change and making spaces that really work for the occupants. What makes green building work very well is when you have a very good collaboration. You bring people together and they understand each other. And so one of the things that the LEED rating system does is it gives a common language. Because if people are going to work together, they need to have a language that they can all share. And sometimes you have interior designers talk about color and shape, and you have engineers talking about BT, kilowatts and thermal, temperature, and they don't know how to talk to each other. But in fact, the interior designer, if they use light colors in the building, then the electrical engineer can put in lights that don't use as much energy because the light colors reflect the light. So they need to talk to each other. And then the mechanical engineer doesn't have to make as big a cooling system because there's not as much energy, not as much heat coming from the lights. So the lighting designer and the electrical engineer and the mechanical engineer and the interior designer all need a way to talk to each other to make these buildings work. And so it's not about one person knowing all these things or one entity. It's about people being able to talk to each other and work together and communicate to make it work. And it's really a very satisfying way to work once people understand it, once they realize it's a new thing. It used to, people are used to, the architect designs the shape, and then the engineer designs the mechanical system, and the interior designer designs the interior, and they never talk to each other, and then it's impossible. Then you can't get high performance because these things they're not designed to work together. This conference is it's wonderful seeing all the different players. That's part of this collaboration, right? All the different people from the different sectors that work on buildings coming together, and that's exactly what's happening here. Yesterday we did a workshop about green materials, and right in the room we had all the different engineers and the architects and the construction managers and the product manufacturers all together, all working on how to make green materials. And so that's what the kind of opportunity that this brings. And so I think continuing to develop that idea and maybe even providing workshops and trainings on how to facilitate that kind of collaboration. Because it's not just, you can't just put everybody in the room and say, okay, now work together. Somebody has to help provide that communication, that thread. And so even some training on how to do that, and look at the people some people are naturally good at facilitating that kind of work, and so put them in that position to help do that kind of work, I think will really help make this progress. Well, I think it must be that many of these ways of doing things that are better for the environment, that are healthier, that are more efficient, will become standard and will become more common. But I don't know if, when the things that we consider green now, when they become standard, that's not the end, because there will be the next horizon, right? There's always the next challenge. And we have so far to go to really get to the place where we live on harmony with nature on this planet. It's such a long journey that I think even our children will still have the next horizon, the next challenge on that journey. So hopefully the things we consider green now will be old news to them, and they'll be working on the next things.